Joshua chapter 2. I'm going to read the full chapter to you today. Okay? I know. And this is not your typical Christmas passage. Okay? So, with that being said, let's read Joshua chapter 2. The word of the Lord says this. Then Joshua son of Nun secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, the men left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly, you may catch up with them. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Our lives for your lives, the men assured her. If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us this land. So she let them down by a rope through the window. The house she lived in was part of the city wall. Now she had said to them, go to the hills, so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there for 3 days until they return, and then go on your way. The men said to her, this oath you made us swear will not be binding on us, unless, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all of your family into your house. If anyone goes outside your house into the street, his blood will be on his own head. We will not be responsible. As for anyone who is in the house with you, his blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on him. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you have made us swear. Agreed, she replied, let it be as you say. So she sent them away, and they departed. And she tied the scarlet cord in the window. When they left, they went into the hills and stayed there 3 days, until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the 2 men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, the Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us. Let's pray together. Again, gracious Father, we thank you for your word. May its truth be imparted in us today in a way that will be pleasing and upright unto you. I just pray that our translation of your message to us would ring in our hearts, that it would be acceptable unto you, and that it would mold us and shape us from the inside out. We know that your word has the power to do that it is living and active, and we pray for that truth to be made alive for us today. We ask these things in Christ's name. Amen. Look, for those of you who may be new or maybe weren't around last week, I'm not seeing anybody at first glance, but again, this is going to seem like a really odd scripture for Christmas. Why in the world are we reading out of Joshua 2, the story about Rahab and the spies? Well, what we're doing is we're doing our Advent series based out of Matthew chapter 1, the genealogy of Christ. Okay, and what we're doing this week is we're picking somebody specifically out of the genealogy of Christ who might be in there and seem a little bit peculiar at the time, obviously, as you read through this story. But nonetheless, it's in the genealogy of Christ, and that person this morning is Rahab. Now, with that being said, Just trying to throw that out so we're all on the same page. We all gear up here together. I don't know about you guys. When I was a kid, my parents had this thing called a label maker. Now, they still have label makers, but they're different than the label makers I remember growing up with. Maybe you had a label maker ahead of mine, and that's cool. But like the model we had was this plastic gun type of thing with a round wheel on the top, with letters and numbers, and you put this ribbon, this really hard, different color, you get blue or green or yellow, tape in it with an adhesive backing, right? And you'd set the letter you want, you press the button, and you'd spell stuff out. You take the backing off, and you put up a label. It's a really cool machine, especially for a little child. I thought, man, this is really neat. Like, it's simple concept, there's not much to it, and you can label all your stuff to keep it organized. Now, show of hands. Anybody have one of them? Alright, so we weren't alone. Okay, I figured a lot of you probably did. Like, if I ever see one, if you ever see one at a Salvation Army, really cheap or Goodwill, let me know, because I'll probably go pick it up and put it up in my office. You know, whether you can buy tape for it anymore, I'm sure you probably can. But the thought would be kind of cool, right? I used to play around with that thing, and then I get yelled at for wasting the tape, right? Because that wasn't acceptable either. But we label things in an attempt to help us organize. Like, you put the labels up in your garage, under your tools, or in your pantry. That's where I remember at home, right? In our old house on State Street, not where my parents live now, like the house I remember growing up, and we had this big old pantry, you know. Tuna fish goes here, and da-da-da goes there. I just remember tuna fish in the pantry. How weird is that? Because I hate tuna fish. But that's what I remember being in the pantry. Maybe it was salmon cakes, some sort of something, product from the ocean, I don't know, right? Anything you want to keep cool, Tommy. Anything you want to label is what you can use as a label maker. So it's like, all right, it's got downloaded in, right? They're still around, but they've changed a little bit. We label things in our life, like I said, in an attempt to help us organize. What about when we label people? What about when we label people? Do we label people for the same reasons that we would label a garage or a pantry or an office? I'm not saying that it's right to label people. In fact, I've Googled it many times this week in preparation for my sermon just to see what all is out there. And anytime you put anything at all about labeling and people into any sort of sentence in any order in Google, your first multiple pages are just coming up with why you should never label people. Like, I mean, it doesn't matter what order you put the words in, that's what's coming out. And we would all agree on that, wouldn't we? We would say that people don't need to be labeled, but I think if we're honest with ourselves, we do it. Or we have it done to us. Or probably both. But why do we do it? Do we do it for the same reason that we organize other things in our lives? In an attempt to make relationships, in an attempt to clarify people and where they are, in an attempt to have some sort of perceived control over somebody. It's interesting to think about. When you think about things that people get labeled for, what do they get labeled for? Well, people get labeled for different stuff. They get labeled for their faith or for their religion. People get labeled for what race they are. They get labeled for their sexuality. They get labeled for their social status, who they hang out with, who they identify with. And the list could go on and on and on and on. And to be honest with you, I think this is something that the church has probably done a little bit too much of in the past. We tend to label people. We tend to put them in groups. Why do you think people are turned off by the church? Because if I do a Google search on what do people outside the church think of people in the church, what are some of the words that come up? Judgmental, hypocritical, exclusive. When people outside the church think of people inside the church, these are the words that they label you with. Why is that? Because traditionally the church hasn't done a good job of not labeling those outside the walls of the church. It's a reaction. You know what's fascinating? When we read through Joshua chapter 2 and we talk about Rahab, or we look into the life of Rahab, you could use the words hypocritical, you could use the words exclusive, you could use words judgmental, and none of that would fall on Rahab. Yet Rahab has an incredible history through this book. Rahab is involved in some big parts and some big stuff in this book. Right? Why do I bring that up? Because Rahab has a label thrust upon her. It's not a label that she asked for. We don't know if it's a label that she desired or wanted or not. We're not privy to that information. But as soon as I say Rahab, you already know what the label of Rahab is. You've heard it before, even if you've probably never been inside the walls of a church before. When I say Rahab, you think either the harlot or Rahab the prostitute. That's not what we call her. That's actually what Scripture calls her. That's how she's identified within the pages of this book. It's not just Rahab. Here's what I mean. What's verse 1 say today? Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. Rahab isn't mentioned much in Scripture. She's mentioned again in Matthew chapter 1, I think it's verse 5, in the genealogy of Christ, and it just says Rahab at that point. But if we would jump to the next reference of Rahab, found in Hebrews chapter 11, which is the heroes of faith. We're talking about the big people of faith in the Bible. What does it say? Hebrews 11:31. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. Could have just said Rahab, right? But the author of Hebrews chose not to. What about James? James says this in chapter 2, verse 25. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? So guess what? When Matthew writes in Matthew chapter 1, verse 5, the word Rahab, guess what everybody thinking about in his Jewish audience, including yourself who are not Jewish, think about when they read her name? The same thing that's written to her in every other aspect of the Bible where her name is mentioned. Rahab, the prostitute. It's not written there, but it's there. Every time this woman's name is mentioned in Scriptures, it's there. The reason we read over this entire account in Joshua chapter 2 today is because this is the account of Rahab in the Scriptures. Joshua chapter 2 is all we know about Rahab. It's the instance of her. She's mentioned in these other places, but this is her story. There's not somewhere in the Scriptures there's some obscure reference or something that's tucked away. This is what we know about her. She hid the spies. But to really make this passage come alive today, I think we must fully understand the gravity of it. We must understand the risk that she took. And we kind of often take this for granted. So let's think about this passage. Here's some important points that I want to throw out here to make sure that we're all on the same page. The Israelites are about to invade the promised land, the land of Canaan. The land is quote-unquote flowing with milk and honey. And this is not the first time that the spies were sent into the land. This is the second time. The first time happened about 40 years earlier. Right? And that was not a good situation for the Israelites. 12 spies sent into the land. They came back out and they reported. 10 of the spies reported, we can't do it. The giants are too great. The people are great. The descendants of Anak live there. And when they said the descendants of Anak live there, that's basically like saying to the Israelites, all of this land is inhabited with people like Goliath. That's essentially what they were saying. They were blowing it out of proportion. We can't do it. But there was 2 spies who said, no. With the help of God, we can. Because it's not about us, it's about God. 2 spies, Caleb and Joshua. 2 men who were the only 2 men who were actually allowed to go into the promised land from that original group. You see, in those 40 years, the group had turned over. And the ones who went in and said, no, we can't invade this land, have long since died. Even Moses had passed on, which is why when we read through the account of Rahab, it's under the leadership of whom? Joshua. Who is Joshua? One of the original spies who said, we can do this. That's who God wanted in charge. But this is the second time that they sent spies in there. The first time was, can we do it? 12 men went to spy on Canaan. 10 were bad, 2 were good. They decided no. God let them wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Now they're back. And it's different this time. Joshua didn't send the spies in with the order or directive saying, can we do it? What did he send the spies in with? We're doing this. Figure out how. Where's the weaknesses? What's the best strategy? What's the best plan of attack? And he says in verse 1, concentrate where? On Jericho. Now, I'm not sure he liked a whole lot the battle plan that God gave for Jericho, but he executed it perfectly in the long run, if you know anything about biblical history. But that's where we're at. Because of that, it says, or it indicates that when Rahab was was talking about these spies, she knew why they were there. And because somebody spotted them going into her house, everybody else knew why they were there. Would they have been looked upon favorably by the inhabitants of the land? Absolutely not. Those two spies represented the nation of Israel, who was coming into your land and your property and your home to completely destroy you. To kill you, your family, your animals, and every living thing. To take over your possessions, to take over your property, and to take over your dwelling. This is not a small deal. That's what these spies represented. So when Rahab hid these spies, how would she be viewed by every other person she knows? As a complete and utter traitor. Yeah, she hid the spies, right? We read through the Bible. Yeah, she hid the spies. Good for her. I would have done the same thing. Would you? Would you? She hid the spies to her own detriment. Not only that, had she gotten caught with the spies in her house, she would have been killed immediately, branded as a traitor and slaughtered. Not only her, but her and her family. But why did she hide the spies? She hid the spies for a reason. Because she knew what was going to happen. She said to the spies, what? The hearts of these people are melting in fear because of you and your God. She says melting in fear because of you, but then when we read through the dialogue there, it's not just because of the people, it's because of the God whom the people serve. It's because of the God whom the people present and the power that they have seen through that God. That's why she was willing to take the risk that she did. Now, as we get to this account of Rahab, what's interesting is that we're not given information to who, but we know that somebody saw these spies going into her house, didn't they? The spies went to Rahab's house. How do we know? Because the king sends word to where? Rahab. We know the spies are going into your house. Send them out to us. Now, when you look over this, it's kind of an interesting little way to tell the story here. They didn't go house to house. Right? And they go house to house, gutting out houses, cleaning stuff out. Then they'd been looking for the spies, and they didn't know. They knew they were in Rahab's house. And if you knew two spies were in an abode, in domicile, in somebody's house, you were reported they've gone in, and you need to get these men out, what do? You send in a SWAT team, right? Like the end of Christmas vacation. Right? Let's keep it like around the holiday here, right? At the end of Christmas vacation, they're in the room, they're celebrating, and all of a sudden the SWAT team takes over the house inside, they're on the roof, they're going down ropes, they're swinging through windows, and they're busting out, they're freezing. We got to get the bad person out of here, right? But that's not what they do, is it? The king sends word to Rahab through his men, we have heard that you have brought these men are in your house, bring them out to us. Now, why did they not go breaking down the doors of this house? Isn't that interesting to think about? Did you ever contemplate that? Kind of makes you wonder what they were afraid of finding inside, doesn't it? Again, this is the house of Rahab the prostitute, if you're not on the same page with me here. Right? Rahab, we heard that they're in your house. Bring them out. She says they're not in here. They went out. Now, had that been the end of the story, she wouldn't have had to hide the spies, would she? But we know that she hid the spies, which means we know that the soldiers went through the house, or the people that the king sent went through the house looking for them under the pile of flax stalks on the roof. They didn't find them, they got away. That's the risk that Rahab took. You think her heart wasn't beating out of her chest as these men walked through her house looking for the two spies? I think it was. I think it was. I think she was absolutely, positively, probably about freaking out. I've been dripping sweat. That's what I do. I'm not yet, so we're in good shape. That's usually where it starts, right? Many of you have let me know that before, so it's all good, right? When the men approached Rahab's house, they didn't go breaking down the doors. Like I mentioned, they asked. Because they all knew what went on in Rahab's house. Because her name wasn't Rahab. It was Rahab the prostitute. That's how you know her, that's how I know her, and that's how everybody at the time knew her and identified her house. That's a label that followed her around at that time and has followed her to this day ever since. Now, I want to be abundantly clear that not all labels are bad. I don't think all labels are bad. Like, I coach volleyball, and 2 years ago I had 2 Emilys on the team and I had 2 Kylies on the team. I'm not going to, during the heat of a game, try to call out everybody's first and last name. First off, I'm going to mess it up constantly. Second off, it takes too long. So I give nicknames, right? I give nicknames. My Kylie's easy. I just keep her as Kylie because she's my Kylie, so that's the easiest for me. You know, Kylie McDermott is like 6 foot tall as an 8th grader, which is a wonderful thing to have on your team as a volleyball coach. Let's just shorten it up to Durham. All right, Durham. Then we got Emily Heverly and Emily Bartlett. 2 Emilys. So there's no distinguishing features between the 2. So Bartlett becomes Bart. Emily Heverly becomes Tank. That's a nickname in and of itself. Like, it's not meant to be rude. I'm like, how can I find another name? How do you call her? You want to know how I came up with it? Here's how it was. I'm thinking, okay, how do I shorten this up? I'm a single syllable nickname kind of guy because 2 syllables defeats the purpose. It takes too long. And I called her by her, what was it, M. I called her M and then her number, which is like 21. I'm like, M21 or EM21. You know what? That kind of sounds like Tank. That's how my thought process went. It had nothing to do with her weight because she's not even remotely heavy. But I call her Tank now. So she might hate it. So that's terrible. Hopefully she'll let me know if she does. But not all nicknames are bad. Not all nicknames are bad. One of my favorite scenes from the movie Sandlot, right? Right? Is when Scott Smalls comes walking out of the store and he's with Betty and Jet Rodriguez and the other rest of the team is out there talking about Babe Ruth. And Ham, the big catcher, is going, "Oh, Babe Ruth, the great Bambino." And they can't understand what he's saying. He says, "The great Bambino." And Scott Smalls says, "What?" And they all look at him like he's got a snake or a worm crawling out of his ear. Because how could you not know who Babe Ruth is? And what do they say to him? They say this. First one says, the Sultan of SWAT, the Titan of Terror, the Colossus of Clout, the King of Crash, the Great Bambino. And of course, he fakes like he knows who that is at the time, just so he's not embarrassed. Do you think Babe Ruth was embarrassed by any of those nicknames? I think Babe Ruth absolutely loved those nicknames. I think I would kind of love those nicknames. That'd be kind of cool. Sultan of SWAT? All right, I'm down with that. Labels are used to identify people. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to play a simple game. Y'all look like you're still awake for the most part. Okay? I'm going to have you finish the labels of these people, because I think you know most of them. So out loud, when I say the first part of their name, I want you to finish it. See if we're on the same page here. Ready? Attila the. Alexander the. Very good. Conan the. Well done. I'm impressed so far. Who else do we got here? Java the. All right. Andre the. Oh, yeah, that's good stuff. Now, let's amp it up a little bit. Let's get into superhero mode. You ready for this one? All right. Wonder. Oh, it's getting quieter. Maybe everybody's a little bit shy. The Green. The Incredible. Good job. That was one of my favorite shows as a kid growing up. Buffy the. Yeah, all right. Don't be too embarrassed here. It's all good. If I say Old Blue Eyes, you think of Frank Sinatra. If I say the King of Pop, you think of Michael Jackson. Right? And I love sports, because sports give us some of the greatest nicknames ever. Like Charles Barkley, a former basketball player, now an analyst, was a big guy, and he could rebound the snot out of the ball, but he was a fairly rotund fella, and he had one of the best nicknames of all time. His nickname was the Round Mound Rebound. I think that's just outstanding. Dale Earnhardt was the Intimidator. Pete Rose was called Charlie Hustle. Not too long ago, Pittsburgh fans, you cheered for Jerome Bettis when he ran the football because he was the bus. Exactly. Irvin Johnson isn't even replied to or isn't even referred to by his name. We just call him Magic, right? And Muhammad Ali is simply the greatest. But we're not talking about them today. We're talking about Rahab, the prostitute. This is not the kind of label that you want following you around in your life. But the label was there because it's who she was. It's how she was identified. And maybe you're sitting there thinking to yourself, Scott, get to the point, because once again, this is not your greatest Advent message, and I don't see where you're going with this. It doesn't make sense. But this message follows a similar pattern to the message I spoke about last week and the message I spoke about 2 weeks ago. I think this has everything to do with Christmas. Why? Because it has to do with the birth of Christ. Matthew chapter 1, verse 5, the genealogy of Christ, in verse 6 says this: Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse. And Jesse, the father of King David. a direct grandmother, to a degree, of King David. Went straight down a line from Rahab to King David. We know about King David, don't we? We know who he was. We know a lot of stuff about David because the Bible, especially the Old Testament, Samuel, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, gives us a whole rundown about who David was, what he did, and what he represented. You know what's interesting about David? He had a label as well, didn't he? Because oftentimes we don't just refer to him as David. Matthew chapter 1, verse 6 doesn't refer to him as David either. What does it say? King David. King David. Scripture tells us that King David was a man after God's own heart. And in my opinion, only God can turn a family line so quickly. Only God can take a prostitute and turn him into a king or her. Only God has the ability to change and alter the course of people's lives with such power and such passion to go from prostitute to king. Why labels? Because it helps us identify things. Many of you have labels thrown at you as well. I know I do. I honestly prefer to stay away from the big label in my life. I was doing an interview with a professor from Penn State this week who's doing some sociological study on religion and our society. And one of the things I told him, I said, look, when I introduce myself to people, when I meet people for the first time, I said, the last thing I do is to tell them I'm a pastor. And he looked at me very quizzically. I said, this was something new to him. And he said, why is that? And I said, because it changes the conversation. And I said, the second I tell somebody or that they find out that I'm a pastor, guess what happens? I can see them mentally rerunning everything they said to me in their head, wondering how many times they swore, how many times they cussed, what they talked about, and how I was looking into that conversation. If I never tell them I'm a pastor, I get a true conversation with somebody. If I say I'm a pastor, I don't know if I'm getting the real person. So that's why I don't tell them I'm a pastor. Look, a lot of you guys, when you introduce me to a family or a friend or somebody that I don't know, what do you say? This is my Pastor Scott. And that's okay. I don't mind that. I'm not ashamed by that. I'm honored by that. But that's the reason I don't tell people I'm a pastor right off the bat. For the most part, though, labels in our lives aren't flattering. They're not how we want to be remembered. They're not how we want to be identified. Maybe you have a label. Maybe it's a label that's followed you around from childhood. Maybe it's a label that you picked up just last week. Maybe it's a label that you have allowed to define you instead of being defined by God. You know who else had a label? Matthew. Levi, if you prefer. The guy who wrote the genealogy of Christ in Matthew chapter 1. Matthew had a label. It wasn't just Matthew. Matthew was hated by his countrymen, by his peers, and by his townspeople. Why? Because he wasn't just Matthew, he was Matthew, the tax collector. The tax collector. Matthew, the traitor. Matthew, the friend of Romans, not of the Hebrews, not of the Jews. Matthew. At least that's who he was until he met Christ, isn't it? When Matthew met Christ, he was no longer defined as Matthew, the tax collector. It changed his identity. It changed who he was. From Matthew, the tax collector, to Matthew, the child of God. It's the same label, if you are a follower of Christ, that each one of you should follow in your life. Whether you want it to or not, it's going to follow you. Scott, the child of God. And I can go around the room here and point out each and every one of you and put child of God after your name if you are a follower of Jesus Christ. We so often allow the labels that society gives us to define us when God says, that's not what I want defining you. I want my love defining you. I want my Son defining you. In fact, that's why I sent him down. You've heard me say it before if you've been here for other Advent seasons. From the second Christ came into this world, the shadow of the cross hung over it. He came with a mission, he came with a purpose, and that purpose was to take your labels away that others give you and give you a label as his own. And in that label, you can rest assured. You can sleep well. You can stand on the rock and stand on the firm foundation that is Jesus Christ. Because that's exactly what happened in Matthew. He took the dregs of society, the lowest of the low, the tax collector who cheated and swindled, and people hated him because of it, and he said, "Come, follow me." Same thing happened with Abraham, with Rahab, with David, with Solomon, with Josiah, all the way up to Joseph and Mary. God took their labels and said, "You are a child of mine." Will you allow God to do the same thing for you today?